Welcome to this edition of Fuel for Thought. I'm Kristen Balacia, Vice President of Consulting Services at S&P Global Mobility. Today we'll be discussing the unprecedented market dynamics and responses to a market that is just about every market force bearing down on it, while at the same time experiencing record profit margins, but watching consumer loyalty plummet, with more consumers now defecting than staying loyal. I'm pleased to share that today's podcast will be facilitated by Mike Wall, Executive Director of Automotive Analysis. He'll be joined by Cheryl Woodworth, OEM Sales Marketing and Diversity Consultant, and Amber Daniel, Director of Product Strategy, Polk Automotive Solutions.
Amber and Cheryl, thank you so much for joining me for this discussion today.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
You
Yes,
bet.
it's great to be here.
You bet. So let's start things off. Just to frame the discussion, for the last 2.5 years, we've gone through a pretty significant dislocation within this industry. We've seen, obviously, the impacts of COVID, the impacts to the production environment, saw an impact to demand, certainly at least initially, when we weren't necessarily even able to go out and buy vehicles for a period of time during lockdowns, and then dealers rapidly coming back with strategies to market vehicles and sell vehicles to people. And indeed, we saw consumers come back to the market very quickly, maybe even quicker than we were able to support from a supply chain perspective. And now we've been going through this strange period of not having enough cars to sell, and yet also seeing profit margins at or near record levels for the automakers. So I guess starting with you, Amber, give us a lay of the land. Where do you see the market shaping up right now? What are the conditions on the ground?
Well, I think we've seen a major shift in strategy, advertising strategy from a dealer perspective. We're so used to marketing from an incentive-based sort of communication, specific inventory, to now having conversations with dealers and dealer agencies that I really never thought we would have about future in-market audiences. Having been in the industry for a while, if you'd asked me 2 years ago if that would ever be something that we would discuss at a tier 3 level, I probably would have laughed. So I think we've seen a major departure from what we've known over the past, I would say, 10 years in retail. And now we're seeing a major drop in loyalty because of that, both on the brand level and, the dealer level. So just lots of market fluctuations in terms of strategy, but also loyalty that you pointed out.
Great. That's really interesting. So Cheryl, I guess let's turn to you. When we start digging below the surface a little bit, especially thinking about loyalty and what are you seeing sort of at the category level, or when as you dig below the surface in the data, how are we seeing the loyalty evolve in this kind of ever-changing market where we've got some constraints on the supply side?
Yeah, I think you see the loyalty impact in a variety of areas. Just looking at luxury vehicles, for instance, they're trending higher than the industry in their loyalty decline. I think they're down to 46% right now, which is unprecedented. And if you take out the nuances that Tesla brings, with Tesla having such high loyalty, they're down to 42%, the other luxury brands. So it's a interesting time for those higher end premium, customers, and their loyalty to the nameplates that maybe they've been driving for the last couple of years because of availability. On the same side of the equation is the utility vehicles, right? Those drivers now have almost 150 vehicles to choose from in that space. And utility vehicles have the highest loyalty of any vehicle segment at 74%. But now, customers have such a huge pool to choose from. So if they're in the market for a utility vehicle right now, and they need a vehicle right away, they don't have to stay with the brand or the model that they've been driving. They have all these other ones to choose from. And if something's on the lot, they might jump and change brands.
No, that definitely makes sense. And it's interesting. While on the one hand, we've seen this lack of supply, or relative lack of supply, being a constraint, it's also giving maybe a little bit of power to the consumer in the fact that switching ability, that they're not as call it beholden, or not as anchored to a given brand, a given even nameplate as they would have been in the past, and they're increasingly, by virtue of supply constraints, venturing out, I guess, for lack of a better term. Are you seeing any trends within, if we think about the U.S. as a whole, but within the U.S. regions, are there trends that are starting to emerge in some of these other areas within the U.S.?
Yeah,
Definitely.
Go ahead,
Cheryl.
Amber. Oh, I was just going to say inventory levels, are improving from kind of a 2021 low. You're seeing it across the country, but not at the same rate across the country. California, one of the largest states market-wise, is up 20% from their low, where a state like Texas is only recovered about 10% from their low right now. So there is really a discrepancy when you look across the U.S. on the rate of recovery with inventory.
And Amber, what does that mean when you, maybe at the dealer level, and when we think about that, when we have these regional variations kind of creep in, what are the considerations that we're increasingly seeing?
I think it goes, sort of back to our conversation around buying behavior and how dealers are approaching advertising. Since the beginning of the pandemic, there has been a pretty significant shift in how consumers have access to buying vehicles. So we've moved from more of a traditional sense of buying, individuals or consumers going into dealerships to now having the ability to buy those vehicles online. And I think we're seeing that, problem or that opportunity grow as we move into or become more comfortable as consumers buying cars online. So you've got the concept of digital retailing and just the pre-order even opportunity that consumers haven't had. And I think that also leads us into sort of the future, I think, of retail and what's happening with EV. I think as we start to see that EV segment grow, I think we will continue to see a shift in buying behavior on behalf of consumers, but also just a different mentality from a dealership standpoint, right? We're talking about how they merchandise their vehicles on their website, the pricing that they show on their website, and just how competitive they are from an overall standpoint. And Cheryl, one thing I wanted to add to your comments about the luxury segment is that segment's going to be, or that classification is going to be interesting to watch over the course of the next few years, I would say. And that's also because of the level of competition. We talked about, you mentioned 150 sport utility vehicles, probably nameplates available, whereas the luxury classification is really fighting for 20% of the market. So that's only going to become more challenging for those luxury brands. So I think we're sort of on the verge of some interesting changes in the marketplace.
And that is really interesting. I guess sticking with that theme to some extent, there has to be some pretty interesting implications if you think about it from even an OEM and a brand marketer perspective, or even the agency role as well. We've got a lot more nameplates out there chasing both on the ICE side, internal combustion engine vehicle side, and now increasingly the battery electric vehicle side. A lot more mouths to feed on that sense. From that sense, how are these marketers kind of grappling with that? On the one hand, you've got challenges on the supply side. Eventually that will abate. So even if we say we'll transition, even with that transition and we get to better days ahead on the supply side, I have to believe that there's going to be some new challenges and or maybe new ways of thinking about that marketing strategy and even go to market. How do you think that's going to kind of transpire and over the intervening months and as we go into the next couple of years?
I think, again, it goes back to messaging and also the goals. Outside of just OEMs, I'll go back to dealer or tier 3. I think, vehicle acquisition has become more of a focus, whereas before it's just sort of by nature they were able to acquire vehicles to sell to their used car markets. And I think also just in general, service bay, it has always been a very important component to the dealer business. But I think, in today's market and future markets, it's going to become increasingly more important to generate more sales opportunities for dealers. And also, I think it's reflection on the OEM. So they will be more engaged in those in-store customer experiences to help sway those loyalty numbers that are so volatile right now.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting. I think we chatted in the past that as we see fleet start coming back, that's been sort of an underserved segment over the last 2 to 3 years, especially daily rental fleet, but fleet in general. It will be interesting. I suspect, I guess, Amber, I put this back to you because you brought up the dealer side of the equation. And it is less, it's not just about selling new vehicles, frankly. We've got used vehicles, we've got service. And I do wonder if the fleet side of the equation, as that starts to come back, and as we start to see dealers add to consideration there, that fleet side of the equation may also become more important within that dealer perspective as well. Would you agree with that?
I would. I think, interesting enough, I wouldn't have guessed that fleet played such a major role in the industry in general and just sales volume, but it is a significant lever to pull to sort of get us back to that level where we're, moving enough metal, if you will, to hit those pre-pandemic, volatile market conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. Cheryl, going back to you, when you think about, again, some of these owner loyalty trends in what we've seen here over the last better part of 2 years, are there other considerations we should be thinking about as we think about assessing the market and analyzing the market? You mentioned the utility segment for sure, and how that's kind of evolved and morphed into a very large segment in and of itself. Any other considerations within loyalty that we should be thinking about as we're kind of, again, assessing the market going forward?
I just, agree with what Amber was saying earlier, the importance of what's going to be happening on the dealer level going forward as far as after sale service and how they handle the customer at that point, how the OEMs are communicating to their customer, whether it's, shifting to a digital retail experience and what that experience is going to be like for the customer. I know when we chatted previously on these topics, we were talking about, the kind of tire kickers versus the person who's comfortable doing everything online. And that's really going to impact, the customer experience overall and ultimately the loyalty to brands.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's becoming very difficult to be able to actually go on a test drive these days. Now, eventually that will improve and we'll start to see a little more normalization on that front. But I'm struck that even if we think back to the early days of COVID lockdowns and coming out of those lockdowns, dealers had to really evolve in their thinking very quickly. We had probably some dealers that were a little hesitant, a little resistant to change. And I think both Amber and Cheryl, you both have kind of mentioned that sort of digital experience. And I guess I kick it back to you, Amber, in this sense. When we think about that shift to digital, how is that gonna look and feel going forward to the best of your estimation? I know it was a trial by fire for some players early on, having to go online and basically do so much of their activity online. And now, as we start to rebuild those inventory levels, it may not go back to pre-COVID levels, but maybe there's an inclination to maybe going back to some of the old ways. Not that there's anything wrong with those entirely, but how does that digital experience maybe look to evolve going forward?
Well, I think just to provide some history on this concept of digital retailing, this is really a concept that was introduced, I would say, back in 2012 or 2013. And it was really difficult to sort of, get the buy-in of dealers and frankly, OEMs to lean into this concept. The concept of digital retailing is really just the internal dealership process taken online, right? So as some of us know that the term Foursquare, that is the process that a dealer takes when they're going through a car deal, right? When they're writing the deal. So I think just in general, it's important to understand what the goal is of that. And then from an OEM perspective, I thought it was interesting. I remember I was on site at the beginning of the pandemic with an OEM, and just the conversations that we're having around digital retailing and how the OEMs actually leaned in and really started fast tracking that digital retailing experience on their OEM websites and trying to streamline that process. So if consumers were going through some level of digital retailing on the brand site, they could then be pushed down to the appropriate dealer with the appropriate information, right? And we're talking about pricing and incentives, which were all really challenging pieces to put together in an efficient way. So I think we'll continue to see that evolve. Like I said, you've got the OEMs that have leaned in and they have implemented these strategies and this technology on their websites, and dealers also embracing this, and it being a helpful, sort of more efficient way for dealers to manage their internal process. You think of the days when, we wrote deals on paper, you would send them via fax. Like, we've really sort of evolved quickly, even though the movement started 10 plus years ago. We're really seeing a shift in now consumer behavior. We're becoming more comfortable with it. So I don't think you will see that change. I think that will only grow in focus. But I also think that, again, Cheryl, being one of those tire kickers in a way, I definitely want to put my hands on the product and I want to drive the car. There will still be those of us who prefer to shop that way.
And we've come a long way since the days of the buzzing fax machine, that's for sure. But one thing that you mentioned that kind of kicked off another question in my mind was, are you starting to see on the automaker level, in the OEMs and the brands, trying to streamline this digital experience through maybe consolidation of trims and maybe simplifying that process of either trim levels or content within the vehicles to make it kind of quote unquote easier for the consumer to consume this data and make the buying decision on their end?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't really thought about that component of it or in that way. I think it's interesting to see. It will be interesting to see what happens over the next couple of years with the chip shortages and just all the evolution of how chips are produced and what they support from a technology standpoint. I think that weighs more into how OEMs are looking at trim. But I think it's important, right? Because not all trim is created equal. You've got an F-150 base model that is an entirely different vehicle than sort of the higher technology version of those vehicles.
Yeah, absolutely. We are seeing some streamlining on that front, to be sure, prioritization of chips and in that sort of thing. And you're right. I think anecdotally we're starting to see some optimization of trims, but it'll be interesting to see if the automakers are able to retain that coming out of the supply constraints and as we get to a more normalized environment. With that, I'll turn over to you, Cheryl, maybe for some parting thoughts on your end, as we think about the topic at hand, inventory and loyalty. Any final considerations on your end as we start to come to a close?
Yeah, just again, I think Amber was really hitting, the nail on this head properly, talking about how this digital retailing movement, inventory, all of this is going to play such a key role in what's happening. And it's going to be so interesting to see how this evolves in the coming years. Just imagining an experience that's seamless, going from an OEM site where you're looking at vehicles with potentially less trims, less options, right? Freestanding options where everything's contained within the trim, and transitioning from the OEM site to the dealer experience to pick up, in a seamless way that feels like one brand experience, I think is going to be really critical moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And Amber, from your perspective, any final takeaways on how the industry and some of those key stakeholders that you work with can navigate this?
Yeah, I think, measurement is something that we need to continue to focus on, and telling that story of online to offline and how effective our advertising is, how consumers are behaving with those digital retailing tools that are on the brand site and on the dealer website. So I think though measurement should have and has been a focus, it's becoming increasingly more important for brands, dealers, and just the industry in general to understand what triggers or what actions consumers take to actually take that next step to buy a vehicle. And again, just really taking into account the way consumers shop today and how they're able to transact online.
Yeah, that's great points all around. Amber, Daniel, thank you so much for joining us. Cheryl Woodworth, again, thank you as well for joining us for this important discussion. Much appreciated.
Perfect. Thank you.